the lecture capture thing was acting up, so I didn't get the lecture. So I'm gonna have to run over like a quick summary of the lectures and record it and then post it so you guys have some information about what went on in class those days. Does anyone have any questions about the assignment coming up next time? I got a paper cut yesterday, but it was like bleeding this morning. I don't have any Band-Aids at home.
That's for paper cut?
Yeah. So I just wrapped up some napkin. I didn't want to bleed all over myself.
Okay.
I'm wearing my brand new bolo tie, so I don't want to ruin that.
Wait, wasn't that tied like SpongeBob or something? Right? Oh, which is a way really big.
It's a little different than SpongeBob.
So it's a little bit.
Okay, so we'll start today doing finishing off the Monopolistic competition. I'll go back over the stuff I went over last Tuesday, so you guys hopefully understand it for the exam, and then we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we'll get into like the fun, weird stuff for the last two classes. So here we have the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve for Monopolistic competition. Remember, the marginal revenue curve is below the demand curve, so it's like your monopolistic market. Because the demand curve is sloping down and it's not flat, the marginal revenue is going to be below that. Because remember, as you drop the price from $9 to $8, you're selling more units, so you're getting that revenue, but you're also giving up the $9 that you could have made on the previous two goods you sold. So yeah, in this case, you're selling two goods at $9. You drop down to $8, you're selling three goods. So you're getting an additional $8, but you're losing out on $2 from the other two units. So the marginal revenue is going to be less than demand. I really wish you had a working clicker so I don't have to walk back over here every time I change slides. Yeah, so they don't just try to maximize revenue when they're producing in this market, just like any other producers. They're going to try to maximize profit, and that's going to be where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So this is the same as monopoly, same as perfect competition. They're going to set marginal cost equal marginal revenue. That's what they're going to try to produce to. Skip back over that. This just shows the marginal cost. Well, I'll highlight this again. Right here at 5 units, the marginal revenue is $5.50, and the marginal cost is $5.50. So this producer is going to produce 5, in this case, burritos. If they make 4 burritos, the marginal revenue is $6.50, and the marginal cost is $5. So the marginal revenue they're making is greater than the marginal cost. So obviously they're going to want to produce another unit because they're going to make more revenue than they're giving up the cost. So they're going to make a higher profit from that. Likewise, if you move from 5 to 6, the marginal revenue at 6 units is $4.50. The marginal cost is $6. So if you're going to produce that 6th unit, you're going to end up losing about $1.50 there. So you're going to stop at $5 or 5 units where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. And you can see here, $7.50 profit, that's your highest profit. Only you can get a profit. That's weird how that example works out. You can get the same profit for one less unit. So here we have the supply and demand curves for a firm in the monopolistic competition market. Right here you have basically what we had for a monopoly. You've got downward sloping demand curve, a marginal revenue curve that's below the demand curve, and then your marginal cost is the Nike switch. You're going to produce a number of units where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So these two curves intersect, and that's going to be 5 units. So you trace up from 5 units to the demand curve, and that's where the price is set, the cost maximizing price. And this graph right here just includes average total costs on there. Again, like in your perfect competition or your monopolistic market, the difference between the average total cost, and the price is going to be your per unit profit. So in this case, the average total cost is below the demand curve. So it's going to be the difference between the price and the average total cost of that number of units multiplied by the number of units. So in this case, it's 5 units times the difference is about 50. So think of this rectangle, the area of that rectangle as being the profit. And then if the average total cost was instead up here above the demand curve, the firm would be operating at a loss. Do you guys have any questions about how this graph works, how it's different than perfect competition? It's pretty much the same as monopoly in this case. Because remember, these firms do have some sort of monopoly power because their goods are differentiated from other firms' goods. Like you come to St. Francis, and this is different than going to, say, a Penn State. I'm not going to say which one's better and which one's worse. This is just the step-by-step to solve for, to find out where to maximize profit. Like I said, marginal cost equals marginal revenue. These two curves cross, that's the point. Trace down to the number of units. And then take up the number of units straight up to the demand curve. Right across the demand curve, that's your price. That's the price the firms are going to sell at. And then take the difference between that and the average total cost and multiply it by the number of units. So you've got your profit. Okay, so what happens to these profits in the long run? So when a firm has total revenue that's greater than total cost, they make an economic profit. Same as they did in perfect competition when we went through that. An economic profit, that gives entrepreneurs an incentive to enter the market. Again, this is just like perfect competition. And because there's no barriers to entry, unlike monopoly, entrepreneurs are able to jump into this market and begin competing. So the example we used last class was Chipotle and selling burritos. Say they're the first one in an area and they're making economic profit. A lot of people are going to them because that's the only place in town you can get like burritos, quality but still fast. We're going to expect new firms to enter the market if they're earning an economic profit. So you're going to get Moe's jumping in, or California Tortilla, other places that sell burritos. And it's going to reduce the demand for Chipotle burritos and compete away that economic profit. Luckily for Chipotle, this is a monopolistic competition market, so they're able to, or in theory, they're able to differentiate their product further. They can do other things to try to make them stand out against their competitors. So you've got this constant process of firms trying to outdo each other and trying to meet consumers' needs better in order to keep getting that economic profit. All right, so here we see how new firms, how their entrance eliminates profits. Right here we have a firm, I guess this is Chipotle. They've got a giant profit right here, the difference between the price and the average total cost. In this case, there's very few competitors. Say when Altoona first got a Chipotle, they're the only Mexican place you can get this kind of food. It's gonna, if they're doing very successful, it's going to attract new firms. Someone else is going to try to open up a competitor. And this confusing right panel here, that's what's going to happen. So this is the original demand curve here, and this is the original marginal revenue curve. These are going to shift down. It's going to decrease demand because these consumers that were going to Chipotle are now going other places. Now the demand curve is down here, and the marginal revenue curve is down here. In this case, the average total cost is equal to demand at the price and quantity being sold for profit. So that's going to compete the profit, economic profit, all the way down to zero. So the difference between the price and the dollar value at the average total cost is zero. It's the same, so there's no economic profit. And this is the same basic process that happened in your perfect competition market. except in this market, firms are able to differentiate their products further. So instead of just all competition stopping once we reach this point of zero economic profit, this is when firms are then incentivized to try to come up with a new idea, change their product to meet consumer needs a little bit better, or offer something, even something completely different, to try to get back that economic profit, their market power, their monopoly sort of power. So in the short run, a monopolistic competitive firm can make a profit or a loss. Again, like we talked about in perfect competition, there's a lot of similarities between these two theories. Firms can produce in the short run at a loss. They have to decide if it's cheaper and if it's better for them to shut down in the short run, or if they should keep producing in the short run if they expect they can profit later, and based on how it relates to their average variable cost. Notice there are quantities or something. Ignore that. Okay, so now in this example, this shows the firm making a loss, which we haven't seen yet. Now in this case, your average total cost is above the price at the quantity where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. So this is the best place to produce for the firm, the optimal number of units in order to maximize their profit. But in this case, they're just minimizing their losses because the average total cost is greater than that price. So like we did before, we got the little box. It shows their loss. Loss because average total cost is above the for this firm, there's no quantity they can produce at where the price is going to be greater than the average total cost. So at no point are they going to be able to make a profit here, an economic profit. They still may be earning an accounting profit. So the firm itself might be making enough money to cover all its costs, but it could be making more money elsewhere. Remember, the opportunity cost is considered in the economic profit or loss. So maybe if this is Chipotle, maybe if they switch it up and instead of selling food in like a fast casual setting, if they went to like a more like sit down style, maybe in this case they would earn an economic profit instead of a loss. Or maybe, I don't know, they would have to switch the kind of food they sell. Somewhere they're leaving money on the table that they could be making it by doing something different. So they say in the long run, the firm must break even. This is saying basically like the end of perfect competition, that there's no more differentiation going on. There's no more innovation, that firms just end with like all the same product. So in this case, it's really not too different than perfect competition. This is saying in the long run, the average total cost is going to cross the demand curve here at the profit maximizing price. So in the long run, because firms are free to enter, there's not going to be long run profits that can persist. But again, this is just kind of ignoring, for simplicity's sake, the fact that firms are just going to innovate again, and they're going to use that innovation to give themselves some market power, which in this case starts the process all over again. Yeah, and this slide is just saying that what I just said. Firms can innovate. They can convince their customers that the product they're offering is better, the experience is better than the other firms do. So they can make it better, or they can use some sort of advertising or create perception that it's better. They can do things like offer a money-back guarantee. So the long run in this case is more of the direction of the trend so that's a good way to think about it. So they're going to tend to compete away profits. Economic profit is going to shrink as other firms jump in and start competing in that industry and offering the same or similar products. And then that's going to continue for a while until another firm innovates, and then the process is going to start all over again. All right, so one of Chipotle's early marketing strategies, I remember this back in the day, was to convince people that their food is healthier. Because this is all natural foods, they're not using GMOs, they're not deep frying anything. So it's much healthier than other fast food options, or had the perception of being that. And that's what they tried to
tried to show people. Obviously, this isn't quite the case. If you've been to Chipotle, their burritos are enormous, so you're basically eating 2,000 calories for one meal. So that's not too healthy. So since then, they've tried to appear more socially responsible. They're not using like GMOs. They're trying to buy local, and they really advertise that they're buying local. You go to some of them, and they will say like, "Oh, like the lettuce came from like this place nearby, or the chickens came from, I don't know, some house up here near St. Francis." They also highly publicize that they recycle a lot of the stuff for like the napkins and the cups and stuff like that. If you guys watch South Park, that's the episode where Billy Mays was pitching Chipotle away to get the blood stains out from eating the Chipotle, from what it does to your system. Okay, so let's compare perfect competition to monopolistic competition. So the textbook, like what we talked about, was that firms achieve productive and allocated efficiency in a perfectly competitive market. That they minimize prices, and basically market forces force them to compete all the way down to like the lowest possible price. They're not able to set prices higher than that because they're not going to sell any goods. So productive efficiency in this case is producing items at lowest possible cost. Obviously, if you're a perfectly competitive firm, you're going to need to minimize cost in order to earn some sort of profit. Then there's allocated efficiency, which is producing all the goods up to the point where the marginal benefit is equal to the marginal cost. So the benefit of consumers is equal to the marginal cost of firms. When we thought about equilibrium in terms of marginal benefit and marginal cost, that's the equilibrium point where the two curves cross each other. So if you have homogeneous products, monopolistic competition doesn't result in productive or allocated efficiency. Obviously, that's a pretty big assumption because in the monopolistically competitive market, you're not going to have homogeneous goods. You're going to have difference between goods. So here's your perfectly competitive firm operating in the long run, where the average total cost is equal to the price, which is demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost, average total cost, all across the same point, so zero economic profit. In this case, this is both allocatively and productively efficient. This is your best case scenario to maximize everything. Here's your monopolistically competitive firm in the long run. Here we see average total cost, which is tangent to the demand curve right here. They cross at that one point. This is above the marginal revenue, where marginal revenue crosses the marginal cost curve. I don't want to say this. The marginal benefit to consumers is given by the demand curve in this case. So the demand curve is over here, not over here. So when marginal benefit equals marginal cost, down here it's not allocatively efficient. Additionally, the average total cost is not at its minimum. Notice right here, average total cost is at its minimum. So firms have to do in a perfectly competitive market. It's not here. At this equilibrium point, it's above the minimum average total cost. So it's not productively efficient. They're not doing this as cheap as possible. So looking at perfect competition as the gold standard, as the type of market we're looking at, monopolistic competition fails to reach that. So this would suggest that monopolistic competition, is a bad situation for consumers. However, consumers want more than just allocated and productive efficiency. Consumers have different needs. So product differentiation does provide benefit to them. If you think of the market for computers, some people just want a real basic computer that they can go on Facebook on and stream movies. Some people want to get a really fancy Mac and actually use video editing software. Some people need I don't know, a lot of power to do computer programming or do coding. So there's a lot of different needs that people have. There was a perfectly competitive market for computers. A lot of people would be left wanting more. Yeah, here for the example, they use a car. So would you want to buy like a Ford Pinto? It's like super cheap and it's not well suited to your taste or preference, or do you want I don't know, a car with a higher cost? So say like a big SUV or a truck that you need 4-wheel drive to go around up here in the winter. It'll meet your needs a lot better, even if it's not being produced at the minimum average total cost. So a lot of consumers are willing to accept a higher price for a differentiated product. Something that if it was a perfectly competitive market, if all the goods were homogeneous, they wouldn't be producing that. People would be willing to pay more money to accept it. So while it's not perfectly efficient from looking, I don't know, from a textbook perspective, it still is better for consumers because they're able to get different goods. So you've got this, you're facing a trade-off between producing the minimum average total cost by maximizing allocated and productive efficiency that you get in the perfectly competitive market, and for getting the differentiated goods that meet all the consumers' needs that you get in a monopolistically competitive market. We'll skip the cupcake example. And finally, let's look real quick at how marketing differentiates products. So a lot of firms, what they try to do is make consumers believe that the product is worthwhile and different from the other firms. Try to make yourself stand out. And they spend a lot of money on this. This involves marketing. So marketing is all the activities necessary for a firm to sell a product to a consumer. It includes a lot more than just advertising. So once a firm manages to differentiate its product, once they can show consumers that it's different, that it meets their needs better, or it's higher quality, something along those lines, and must continue to do so, or in the long run, you're going to end up with other firms offering what consumers see as similar enough products, and you're going to get that economic profit competed all the way down to zero. And you're going to lose that sort of differentiation that you had and the market power that you had. So this process is called brand management. It's the actions that a firm takes to maintain their differentiation. So it could be marketing, just convincing people that the good your firm is selling is different, that's better or meets their needs better, or it's continuing to innovate and offering a slightly better, slightly different product over time. So an example is like the iPhone. Obviously, they continue to market it as being different and being better than their competition. So there it comes in the marketing aspect. But they also innovate, and every single new iPhone that comes out, they offer some different features to try to improve it, to try to meet what consumers need. So in this case, for brand management, they're doing both innovating and marketing. So by advertising, firms are able to increase the demand for their product. They're able to reach more consumers so they know more about the product, or just so that they have like the name in the back of their head when they're going into a store. And then they use it to differentiate their products, to show how they're different, how they're better. And this allows them to charge a higher price and earn more short-run profit, because people are seeking out the good. They have higher demand for this product. Now, some consider advertising to be wasteful and dishonest, that companies are trying to lie or trying to spend money that they shouldn't be spending or shouldn't have to be spending to try to convince people to buy their good when it's really the same as others, or the difference isn't that big. But there is some important aspects of advertising. It reduces information asymmetry, which is when one side of the transaction has knowledge that the other side doesn't. And it spreads the product to new people. So when Chick-fil-A first moved into Altoona, by them advertising, it would have gotten up awareness of the brand. So people in town who hadn't eaten at Chick-fil-A before, never been to one, now know more about it and are more willing to go there. Just instead of driving by and saying, "Hey, what's that new building there?" Now they see, "Oh, let's run over to Chick-fil-A today." And if they don't know anything about Chick-fil-A, they don't know about their quality, the products they sell, any of that stuff, by advertising, they're reducing that information asymmetry. They're giving consumers more information, letting them know, what they sell, what they're known for, that kind of stuff. So a lot of like marketing experts, people that focus on that, they believe that a critical aspect of marketing is creating a brand name for your product, having that name that people know, and once it's said, the quality or the product itself jumps into your mind. A successful brand name can help maintain the product differentiation over time and delay the ability of other firms to compete away the profits. I think Apple's a good example of that with their iPhone. A lot of people, even if an Android was just as good, they wouldn't switch to Android. They would stick with Apple, and they would do so for a while until I think Android would have to be like noticeably better than an iPhone for at least a certain part of their consumer base to be willing to switch. So firms, they have to maintain that the perception of their product is better than others. So I give some examples. Highly successful brand names like Coke, Xerox, and Band-Aid are associated with their products and not to generic products. The same with like Kleenex. I think my dad calls all tissues Kleenex. I didn't realize that Band-Aid was just a brand name for bandages, but I guess that makes sense. I even earlier when I was talking about my finger, I said Band-Aid. Not just mentioning the brand, not even like what the product is. And then Coke, like a lot of places in the country, they call all soda Coke. That's almost as weird as calling soda pop, but whenever you Pittsburgh people are weird. So by another thing they do is that other firms are not able to legally use that company's brand name. So they're able to protect the perception of their product that way. And the franchisees that are allowed to use a brand name, so someone who runs a McDonald's, who runs a Chick-fil-A, Chipotle, whatever, they have to maintain a level of quality and service as expected. They're often required to do certain practices, to use certain, whether it's management techniques or certain, I don't want to say natural resources, but like certain types of food, certain quality food, to make sure that it stands up to the name. One of the things that made McDonald's so great is that you got the same exact hamburger no matter where you went in the country, no matter what McDonald's you stopped into. So you knew if you went there, you were getting that level of quality. So what exactly makes a firm successful, especially in the monopolistic competitive market? It's the ability to differentiate its product and to be able to show consumers that this product is valuable, it creates value for them, and it meets their needs. There's obviously some factors that aren't in a firm's control, like what their competitors do, the number of competitors, how consumers' tastes and preferences change over time. I mean, there was nothing Chipotle could do to make people care about GMOs or to care about recycling. So they just, realizing that this trend is going on, they jumped on it and tried to, I don't want to say take advantage of that, but tried to go along with it. But there are a bunch of factors under a firm's control: the ability to differentiate its product, the ability to produce at a lower cost. These things are within their control. What they do directly affects that. And combined with the trends that are outside of their control, this what determines a firm's profitability. And there's the first firm to sell a good has what's called a first mover advantage. That they become like the first name associated with that type of product by consumers. They don't tend to have a long-lived advantage, but it is they get that, they have that advantage to start out, and it does really help a firm when they're first entering that industry. I don't know how appropriate the Apple iPod, how appropriate that is. One of the things that made Apple so great is that instead of being the first to enter a market, they would let someone else jump in and offer that product. They'd watch it fail and see why consumers didn't like it, and then they'd offer a better version, and that would take off. They tried to offer some sort of like Palm Pilot back in the 90s that bombed, and after that they said, that's it, we're just gonna see how other people mess up and take advantage of their mistakes. And they had great success doing that afterwards. An example give is Bic pens. I guess Bic was the first one to come out with those type of like cheap pens instead of like the fancy fountain pens. I mean, they're still dominant, like one of the biggest pen makers that people use. At the end of the day, it's still giving people better products at like lower prices. That's going to get consumers to buy it. But being the first to jump in, the first in that industry is extremely helpful. All right. You guys have any questions about monopolistic competition? About how it works, how it's different from what we talked about before, how it's like similar? On the final, we'll probably have like 2 questions involving charts. One just like drawing the generic like demand, marginal revenue, marginal cost, either with or without profit. And then one where you have like a shift, like the right side here, a shift in demand to change the level of profit. All right. So before we jump into this, let's take a break. Do you guys have? Let's do that little question thing. Give you guys a chance to relax and reset your brains.
I will that sheet strip on Thursday. You want me to just email you
Yeah, I just go ahead and email it.
Yeah, I'm doing that too.
Okay.
What is it?
You emailed me last night, right? It's not due till Thursday. Are you done with it? Okay. I'll say if not, you can
Wait,
redo
is
it.
there extra credit from you?
What? Sheets?
Yeah. Oh.
'Cause I didn't really know about it.
Oh. This is so worrying.
Yeah, it's like a page and like 3/4. Make it like well over a half of a page on the second page.
What's with the time today?
So my cousin got married in Texas when I was in a conference in the Bahamas. My mom told me to go to the Bahamas to go to the wedding. It was a free trip to the Bahamas, and I had to spend it in Texas. So I told my sister to buy me a bowler tie. Like a couple of my uncles wore like bowler ties and cowboy hats to the wedding. So it was like pretty casual. So when she like gave it to me over Easter, I said, "That's awesome. I'm gonna work to class Tuesday."
How does it work? Like, is it?
It's like a shoestring with like just like a little. It just slides.
So that's all it is. Okay.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy then.
I don't have a cowboy hat. But that'd have been too weird to wear that.
So went all in.
So one uncle showed up. He lived in Houston for a while, so I guess he knew how they dress. He wore like a suit with like the Western like stitching, something like Cowboys had. Showed up with like a 10-gallon hat.
No, you just need a Ford F-150 and a can of school in your back.
Can of school.
Is Gold the right brand? I don't know what people ship.
In
It's
Texas,
usually
yeah, Texas it's pivoting. They can afford it. Pennsylvania, it's cheap.
He just has tubs too long.
Okay. So so no more questions on monopolistic competition? You guys are good on that? I just want to make sure because the monopoly part wasn't great for like the previous season. So I know it was really different from the from perfect competition. So I want to make sure you guys got that. If not, then we're going to jump into talking about Bitcoin and types of currencies, and then we'll get into weird stuff next week. So I basically just smashed together two PowerPoint slides from my monetary theory class last year. So if these look kind of weird, I apologize, but I only made like 2 or 3 slides on here. The rest come from Larry White.
I have a question off fire on here. Is the second
Yeah, I'll I have to do it like this week because Tuesday we're gonna do a review for like probably like half the class.
Can we get it in like more than one class in advance?
Get the what? the study guide more than one? All right, I'll try to do it today or tomorrow. So it's like here, so you guys have it by
Wait,
Thursday.
is that next Tuesday or Thursday?
Next Thursday.
I don't know next week.
Yeah, it starts like on Wednesday or
When is school
Thursday.
over?
Classes next Wednesday.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
the following Wednesday, I
I
guess.
have like a final on the 2nd, and then my next one isn't till like the 8th.
That sucks.
So you got some time to chill.
Yeah, and I asked to move it up to like a good policy.
Does anyone? I don't know if you guys know your final schedule yet, but does anyone have 3 finals on the 2nd? Two. I don't know if it's still policy, but it used to be policy. If you had 3 on one day, you can get one of them moved.
Yeah, I think it's still.
Okay, so if one of you guys have 3 exams that day and you want to move mine, just let me know. You could either take it in my office or I'll have like a GA give it to you or something.
So we have our final next Thursday.
Yep.
Yeah, the 2nd.
What's, is it gonna be like a similar format, like one questions or? how you-
Yeah, it's going to be the same number of multiple choice. You still have 25 multiple choice, and then you'll have like probably 10 or 15 short
So
answers.
just some short answer then?
Yeah. And there'll be a bunch of like extra credit, like short answers too, like 3 or 4.
You gonna see Endgame this week?
I'm not going to see it. I haven't seen a Marvel movie since the original Avengers.
Jeez, man. That's nuts. These are doing it spike. They have that like movie marathon.
There was like too many of them, and it got like overwhelming, and I don't know. I just stopped watching.
They had the
Well, so no, I saw the first 2 Guardians. I think the second Guardians was after. They might have both been after.
That was like a while ago.
Yeah, so I'm like super far behind. I do generally know what's going on in like the Marvel stuff because
They're doing,
you
like, the
can't escape it.
marathon in the theater though, like all 22.
Are they really?
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't go to that. That's way too long.
That's insane. And then Endgame is right at the end.
I don't know if they're doing it all at the same time. Because 22 movies is like, I think it's like
We
48
watch
hours.
3 movies a day. It'll take you
That's doable. I can't imagine watching them all and then sitting through Endgame.
People do though. People marathon that. Sleeping in the theater.
But I would be so exhausted by Endgame, I wouldn't even enjoy it.
I know.
You sleep through the other ones. If you're already sleeping, then you might as well sleep through one yours.
It's a 3-hour-long movie.
Take it.
I don't know. Yeah, Titanic's crazy long. Yeah, Braveheart's like 4 hours. Is it really?
It's like 4 hours. It's not.
No,
It's like 3.5.
Doesn't feel like it though. It's amazing.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right. Let's jump into this. So, the first question is, what exactly is money? Why does money exist? And it didn't always exist. What it is, like definition, is like it's a commonly accepted medium of exchange. It's a unit account and a store of value. So what that means is people are willing to exchange goods or services for money. You're able to spend it to get things. It's a unit of account, so if you can have prices actually listed in that money. And finally, store value. So if you hold that money over time, it's still going to hold its value. You're still going to be able to spend it later. Up there's previous examples of money. There's seashells. There's what looks like rocks. I can't really tell. Maybe some kind of semi-precious metal. There's a silver coin, and then there's the current US dollar. Even though these things are all vastly different, some, like the shells, are naturally produced and you don't do anything to them. The silver is very valuable, but you have to like stamp it and press it and basically do everything and turn it into a coin. And then you've got the US dollar, which is just a piece of paper. These are all very different things.
I saw an article and it said the dollar is
Still what? Still the reserve currency of the world?
Yeah.
Yeah, so when other countries like settle like their trade stuff, they use US dollars. And when you buy oil, like anyone buys crude oil on the international market, they use US dollars and it's priced in US dollars. Although the Chinese yuan is being used more and more frequently in Asia, especially, but there's concerned that that's going to take over and be like the world reserve currency. Dollar's been the world reserve currency since basically since the end of World War One. Before that, it was the British pound for a couple hundred years, and before that, I think it was the Spanish piece of 8. And before that, there was no like worldwide trade. So basically, what we do with money is we seek it to later use for the purchase of other goods. It's not something, especially now, that's valuable in and of itself. It's means to an end. It's something that we can get. Something we can use to get something of value for later. So Karl Menger, back in the 1800s, he asked, why do we give up useful goods and services for mere tokens? Why are people willing to work all day to just get slices of paper or to get some gold coins instead of wanting to get things that are actually valuable to them? And the reason we do that is because barter is terrible, basically. Basically, under barter, you're trading one good for another. So if you wanted, like, instead of paying St. Francis a bunch of money that you borrowed, you would have to do some sort of service for them or make something and give it to them in order to be able to take classes. Which obviously, you can see there's problems with that. It's called the dual coincidence of wants. You have to find someone who not only has what you want, but who wants what you have. So if I've got a bunch of fish and another person has a bunch of wicker baskets, I have to want baskets and they have to want fish, or else we're not going to be able to trade. In very primitive societies, this is how they function, this is how they trade goods. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of problems and it's going to be very difficult to trade. There's going to be very little economic activity in general. So an example of barter that I thought was kind of funny, Larry White mentioned, is marriage and dating. That when you're looking for someone else, you don't just have to want them, but they have to want you. They have to like all the things you bring to the table, all the little like personality quirks and that kind of stuff, and you have to like all their stuff. And obviously, it's very, very difficult to do that. That highlights how difficult barter can be. There's a question of how money supplanted barter. Money wasn't invented by a person. It wasn't something that someone didn't just sit down. I don't know, you gave an example of a king having an idea saying, let's all trade this stuff for goods and make things simpler. What this did is it developed over time through people, through trial and error and people trying to figure out a better way to trade. It's a social convention similar to like language or common law, things that weren't invented but slowly developed over time. People acting in their own self-interest developed this and improved upon it in a slow and long process. This is that spontaneous order we talked about earlier. Like the example I gave was the path over there to JFK that got worn down by people, cutting through the grass trying to walk through there. It's the same sort of thing. They weren't trying to invent money or come up with it. They just figured out something else they could trade that both of them wanted. That wasn't like either of those two goods. That was a third good. So this is kind of like anthropology. Is we're trying to trace, or people that look into origins of money. They're trying to trace how money was formed, how this process, how this took place over time. So at first, people would barter for goods. They would trade things straight up for each other. But over time, they realized that's difficult, and they began to settle on a third good. Especially around the Mediterranean, a good they used was salt because everyone needed salt. So since everyone had salt on hand and everyone needed salt and was willing to get more of it, they could use that as a type of currency where they would trade, so much salt for that fish. At first, there's usually a lot of things that are being used. So maybe they're trading salt. They're using like wheat or some sort of grain. I don't know, maybe firewood. In the early United States, they used corn and tobacco. Those are currencies during like the early colonial times, before they had enough like actual physical currency to begin trading. Eventually, those kind of converge to one good, the one that's considered the best currency. So in a lot of places, it was salt. So at that point, everyone would begin trading salt, and the prices of goods would be denoted in like how much salt it took. From there, it moved on to precious metals. So you get silver and gold, although some places use copper and other sorts of metals. Silver and gold were the two big ones that were used, until the 1900s. But they would settle on precious metals because they were valuable in their own right, and they were, like, everyone wanted them. They're also rare enough that you couldn't just, like, create out of thin air and inflate the currency like crazy. So in ancient Greece, so in ancient Greece, they used originally ox. Oxen was their currency and how they would denote goods. But obviously there's problem with using oxes as currency, especially they're really large and expensive, so how do you buy cheap things? So eventually they moved to a silver standard. But what they stamped an ox on all the coins, and all the silver was still denoted in, like, how much of an ox it could buy. So even though this has changed, they're moving new things, they're still holding on to the old type of money. Interestingly enough, the British, who loved tradition, they were on a silver standard for a couple hundred years. That silver was their currency. Then they switched to gold and silver, a bimetallic standard. It was denoted by pounds, like they still use the pound today. And they called it the pound sterling. Sometimes you still hear that because it was sterling silver. They switched to a bimetallic standard and they mixed up the weight between gold and silver. The exchange ratio wasn't perfect, and it basically overnight switched over to gold completely. Despite the fact they're using gold, for another 200 years they still call it the pound sterling, even though there was no sterling silver being used. Okay, so one of the questions Wenger asked was, why does society converge on a common medium of exchange? In this case, or when it comes to money, the demand for good is self-reinforcing. As more people, for example, the societies using salt, as more people want salt and it becomes more useful, it becomes more useful to use as currency, and more people want it, and it's a self-reinforcing cycle. It's the network effects we talked about during Monopoly. There's network effects to money, and by people beginning to settle on one good, you get a network effect where it's even more useful, and then more people flock to using that type, whatever that good is, as currency. If a lot of other people accept it, then you can be assured that if you accept it, you can then trade it away later and use it to buy something that you actually find valuable. Yeah, so this is the initial process. If you want to trade asparagus, if you have asparagus and someone has a shirt, you want to buy that shirt, but they don't want asparagus, you're screwed. But if there's another good, like salt, that you use as like an intermediary good, you can use that salt, trade a bunch of salt to that other person for that shirt. So the implication of Menger's theory. First is that there's an invisible hand present. Just like Adam Smith said in the market, there's no collective decision making being made. There's no top-down, king saying this is money, this is what we're using. It came from the ground up from a bunch of individuals acting. The first money was commodity money. It was something that was valuable and that people wanted to use. And then over time, it moved to things that weren't actual products that people wanted to use. That it was precious metals, and then right now it's just pieces of paper. Money's core role is a commonly accepted medium of exchange. It's used to facilitate trade, so you don't have to trade things straight up for each other. Then the secondary roles are the store of value and a unit of account. And just to note that the specialization in an economy, it didn't precede the use of money, it emerged with it at the same time. You really can't have people specializing if you're stuck in a barter economy, which is why money is very useful. So now the question is, why did it converge to precious metals instead of sticking with the previous stuff? So these are the five characteristics that you want money to have, especially if you're talking about physical, not fiat money, the actual commodity money. First is durable. You don't want it to spoil. If it goes bad in 6 months, then you can't really use that money. people aren't going to want to accept it, especially like 5 months from now when it's like about to spoil, it's about to disappear. People aren't going to want it. They're just going to try to spend it as soon as possible, or they're just not going to accept it. In this case, we see silver, oxen, and barley. Each of those are durable. Oxen and barley less durable. Obviously, oxen are going to die, and eventually grain will rot. But grain does last for a while. And you want the goods to be portable. Obviously, it's a big hassle to try to carry around money. If you've got to carry around like 100-pound weight that's worth $10, that's not going to be worth it. So you don't want to do that. So it's got to be easily portable. Which silver is very easily portable. Oxen is pretty portable because it walks on its own, but still you got to like tie it up to something. It's still kind of a hassle to use. And barley is not very portable. You need a big sacks of grain. In Sweden, when they were on a copper standard, their copper coins that they commonly use were like this big around. So they would actually have to pay people to like carry around their money for them in wheelbarrows. Why they didn't stay on a copper standard once gold and silver started circulating in the country. It has to be divisible. If the currency unit we had was a $100 bill and you couldn't divide it, it would be a real hassle, especially for anything that was worth less than $100. Silver is pretty easy to divide up. You can just break it. You can cut it in half. Oxen, it's not very divisible. And if it is divisible, if you do cut pieces off, you kill the animal and it's not durable at all. And finally, barley, you can obviously separate barley into smaller things. Next is uniform and easy to grade. Once you coin silver, you press it into a certain size, especially if you put a stamp on it from either the government or from a private mint, attesting to its quality and its size. It's very easy to compare. If you're comparing apples to apples, they're the same thing. That's going to be difficult with oxen to grade like how high quality the oxen is. And he claims that it's easy to grade the quality of barley, but I don't know. That's kind of debatable. And finally, stable value. You want a good that's going to be stable over time. You don't want it to be fluctuating with the season. So obviously, you're going to have high inflation at the end of the season, end of the growing season if you're on a barley standard. Oxen, they die in the winter. So you're going to have a different size money supply based on what time of year it is. So you're going to have inflation and deflation throughout the year, which is not a stable value. And this is a setup to Bitcoin. When we get to the end of Bitcoin, stable value is one of the biggest problems. So does the most suitable commodity become the monetary unit that we use, the commonly exchanged resource? According to Israel Kurzner, Carl Menger's account gives us no assurance if a suboptimal resource jumps out to an early lead, it may converge on that and the cost would be too high to switch to a different currency. I know this seems weird, but all this stuff is going to come into play when we talk about Bitcoin. So this is kind of stuff I want to bring up so I'm not going off on tangents when we're talking about that. There's lock-in problems because common money is a network good and there's network externalities. If you get into if you're in a currency system, you're in, say, an Oxen standard, and silver gold standard isn't that much better, you're going to be locked into that problem into the inferior good as a currency because it's not worth it to switch, and no one wants to be the first mover. No one wants to be the first one to adopt a new currency. Again, that's another problem that Bitcoin has. No one wants to be the first to accept it. There were some switches. We moved from silver to gold because gold was more is easier to be mined. There was more of it. There's a greater supply of gold. And then we moved from gold currency to fiat currency. Fiat currency means it's not backed by anything. It's just a piece of paper. There is questions if you can judge or how to judge the best monetary standard in a fiat currency world. Here's some quick examples of alternative to today's monetary system. The first was Friedrich Hayek. He won the Nobel in, I think, 1977 for his work with Ludwig von Mises during the socialist calculation debate. You have to be alive to win the Nobel, and Mises died the year before. And then the Nobel committee said, oh shit, like, we got to give one of these guys a Nobel for like this great argument. So we'll give it to Hayek, who Mises deserved over Hayek, and a lot of economists believe that this was really a Nobel to honor Mises. Hayek had been writing about political science for like 30 years. He gave up on economics because no one listened to him. So all of a sudden, like, economists want to pay attention to him, and he goes, oh shit, I'm gonna write something about economics. So he wrote about competing private currencies that are they're fiat, they're not backed by anything. So in his system, a bunch of firms could come out and provide currency. And it's not redeemable for anything. It's not backed by gold or silver, any resources. You would assume because it's almost costless to print this money, the firm would just hyperinflate. They would put all this money in circulation, but they'd be the first to spend it, so they'd get a nice profit. And then anyone else stuck with the money is stuck with worthless currency. But he said, no, they're going to compete against each other, and if they want people to keep using it, they're not going to hyperinflate like that. But this is contrary to what Karl Menger said and what we've observed of currencies moving toward one commonly accepted medium of exchange. Because it's so much easier to only have one price listed instead of walking in and every single item having 10 prices listed, or 20 prices listed. Then Ben Klein came along not soon afterwards, and he talked about Hayek's system and how brand name capital could be useful. How if firms had high inflation, which they would profit off of because they were the first to spend it into the economy. So you think like they have a certain value for the currency. If they're the first one to spend it, they spend it at the old value. As more money enters the money supply, it decreases the value. So inflation goes up, it's worth less money. So they capture the profit by being the first to spend it. He said inflation would erode brand name capital. People wouldn't want to use that private money if there was a high inflation rate and if it was likely. However, most of the people that study this don't think that brand name capital is valuable enough to prevent hyperinflation. Then Eugene Fama and Fisher Black, these are great finance guys. They came up with a system of payments without money. So there's no asset of value for Fama's there was no asset of any value, it's just a big accounting ledger. You say, oh, I owe you, like, whatever. I don't understand how without currency circulating or without any demarcated unit of value, how you can really have that accounting thing. But he did that. Fisher Black suggested using like short-term assets, so you're literally trading stocks and bonds. And finally, there's R.L. Greenfield and Leland Jaeger. You guys don't need to know these names, but just this is to show there's a lot of different alternatives. They suggested using a basket of commodities that had a stable purchasing power over time, and then tying the money supply to that. A lot of these were done in like the 70s and 80s because we had massive inflation through the 70s and 80s. In the United States specifically, but in a lot of the Western world. So they're trying to figure out ways to reduce inflation, different monetary systems, because at this point, they've been off the gold standard for like 40 years. So it's still kind of fresh in their mind, especially tying things to commodity standards or having private issuance of notes. So Yeager and Greenfield said use a basket of commodities with stable purchasing power. They picked like 10 commodities like aluminum, tin, whatever, and they had a stable value to the US dollar for like 30, 40 years. 10 years later, some guy looked at them and said, how did this hold up over time? Turns out that it was just happenstance that they happened to be flat with the US dollar. The value fluctuated wildly after that. So there's a lot of difficulties picking a basket of commodities. How can you pick a basket that's representative of the entire economy? All right. So this brings us to the point that economics is a liar sometimes. For you non It's Always Sunny fans, I'm not going to go through the entire thing where Mac provides evidence that the theory of evolution may be false. Just going to say that Friedrich Hayek, Ben Klein, and Eugene Fama, those economists I mentioned, made us all look like stupid economics bitches. This brings us to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is privately issued. It's not a bank. It's not a government doing this. It's a small group of computer nerds, for lack of a better term. And they're not doing it for profit. No one really makes any money off of the creation of Bitcoin. It's non-redeemable. So unlike money in the past, where you could during the gold standard, each bank would issue their own notes. It would be U.S. dollars, but it'd be U.S. dollars issued by that bank, and it was redeemable for a certain amount of gold or silver. This is irredeemable. There's no asset backing it up. So this is kind of like Hayek's system, where it's fiat currency. There's no value that it's tied to, and it's private. It's not being issued by the state. However, this is digital. This is all done online. They talk about the oh, now I'm blanking on the name. The blockchain. That is like a ledger of all the transactions that take place. Each Bitcoin is a unique string of digital characters, all those, I don't know, all the ones and zeros. Each single Bitcoin is unique and it's able to be tracked, and people, these Bitcoin miners verify the transaction. And they track each currency, like each unit of Bitcoin over time. It is a medium of exchange. It has been used to buy goods and services, but is not yet commonly accepted. You can't run down to the grocery store or pay your tuition bill in Bitcoin. And it's issued at a declining pre-program rate. So they have a path for the money supply of Bitcoin over time.
So each like individual value of Bitcoin, like if you have like a certain amount, like each one of those have a different like form of code, like a different line of code that's programmed to it.
Yeah, like I don't have any cash in my wallet. Like each cash has a serial number on it.
Yeah, so it's just like
It's like the same exact thing, but it's all
that's how
digital.
they do it. Okay.
Yeah. And that's when they talk about mining Bitcoin. What it is a bunch of people set up their computers to authenticate each transaction and to make sure. And once a certain number of computers or different Bitcoin miners authenticate that transaction, it then goes through and your Bitcoin is transferred from one person to the other. Okay, so in Washington, D.C., there's a bunch of food trucks that actually do accept Bitcoin for payment. So you can go there, you can buy your lunch using Bitcoin. And you just like pull up your Bitcoin wallet on your phone and just like, I don't know, just wave it in front of the, whatever the payment thing's called. Boom, they take the Bitcoin out of your account and you get the food. So real quick, how's Bitcoin different than earlier currencies? First, you had precious metal and coins. These actually have a value. You can melt down the silver and you can use it for, they use it for a lot of religious icons, for decorations, for houses, for jewelry. There's other uses, like it has some value. And you actually did see in the old days people melt down gold coins and use it to make stuff. Next came privately issued IOUs that were redeemable for precious metal and coins. So it's kind of tough to read these, but the gold looking one, the bottom right corner, is issued by a bank, the National Gold Bank in San Francisco. That's worth $100. So back then, if you had that, you could go to a bank, hand them that note, they would hand you $100 worth of gold. So while the money itself was worthless, it was backed by something that had value. So you can go and exchange it for something of value. So basically, the bank couldn't just come out and print all the currency they wanted, because then people would go to redeem it for the gold, they'd run out. The bank would have to shut down. Next came the government IOUs that are redeemable for precious metals. This is the old silver certificate. A little bit different than the $1 bills we have today. It's got the blue seal over here. If you get one of those and change, make sure you keep it. When I was like in the 3rd grade, I spent one. My dad was really pissed at me when I told him later. I had no idea at the time that it was super rare. Now government fiat currency, they owe you nothing. It's literally just a slice of paper based on the full faith and credit of the United States government, whatever that means. Remember, it still circulates, it still works. Oh, yeah, so we'll end with the story of the Somali shelling, and then we'll jump back into Bitcoin next time. So the Somali government collapsed like 20 some years ago, and it wasn't replaced by another government. And they had, their currency was called the Somali shilling. They had like 500 shilling notes and 1,000 shilling notes. They just kept circulating when there was no government because, they needed money. Well, people started going to the official printing presses in Europe, like private companies contract out for a bunch of countries and print the currency for them and ship it to them. So they went out, got the official designs, the official everything, and got it from the producer that used to make their currency. and people brought it in and hyperinflated the 500-pound note. The value of it fell all the way down to the cost of the paper and the ink and the shipping. So they were worth like 5 cents. Practically worthless. Wait, sorry, that was the 1,000 shilling, the bigger bill. The smaller bill, people didn't do that to. They spent all that time doing the $1,000 or 1,000 shilling. By the time that hyperinflated, it was basically worthless. They realized, well, this is all we have left is the 500 shilling. And instead of hyperinflating it, it just, I guess everyone agreed. No one tried to do it. They didn't hyperinflate it. They didn't like counterfeit it, bring in new stuff. So the money supply stayed the same. And they went without a government for years. And they kept circulating this paper currency. It's worthless. Well, it's worth like a couple cents for paper and ink. But it's still circulated at the old value. Because people still found it more useful to use that than going back to straight up barter or trying to go to the system. So even if the money, like the US dollar today, not backed by anything, you can still, it's still valuable as a medium of exchange. And people can still circulate this money, still use it, even though it's worthless. All right, with that, I'll end class. If you weren't here last class and want your exam back, I've got them up here.